Have you ever wondered what the easiest way to finish your seams are? Today we're going to dive into that, and it doesn't even require a stitch on your sewing machine. Hello everyone, my name is Madison. Welcome to my channel and welcome to another episode in the Classroom series, a series where I teach you everything you need to know about sewing. So let's dive in. Today we're going to be tackling another seam finish. Over the past couple of weeks, I've been sharing two so far different kinds of seam finishes that incorporate different types of stitches on your sewing machine or different methods of finishing your seams. But today we're going to tackle the easiest seam finish, one that doesn't even require a fancy stitch on your sewing machine. It simply requires a fancy pair of scissors. Today's seam finish that we are going to be talking about and I'm going to be showing you how to do is called the pinked edge seam finish. And the reason why it's called the pinked edge seam finish is because it uses a pair of scissors called pinking shears. They're similar to those zigzag scissors you used in craft classes growing up, but these are specifically made for fabric and they essentially just cut a zigzag shape on the edge of your fabric, which keeps it from fraying. This is one of the easiest seam finishes because it doesn't require you to use any other kinds of stitches on your sewing machine. It doesn't require you to do any additional ironing. You simply have to trim the edges of your seam allowance on your fabric with pinking shears. Obviously, it's not the most professional seam finish, but it is quick and easy for home sewing or small sewing projects when you don't want the edges of your fabric to fray a lot and you also don't want to spend a ton of time adding stitches to the edge of your seam allowance if it's going to be visible. So without further ado, let me show you how you create the pinked edge seam finish.
As always, we are first going to start off with sewing a plain straight seam. Again, this is any seam and stitch that we are going to be using to attach two pieces of fabric together, sewing it on a 5/8 inch seam allowance. After we have sewn our fabric together, we are going to press our seam open at our iron. Again, anytime we are sewing a seam, we are always going to press that seam open so that the seam is flat both on the right and the wrong side of our fabric. This is the step right before applying our seam finish.
Alright, now that we have our plain seam, which again is any seam that you are going to use to sew two pieces of fabric together, we sewed it on a 5/8 inch seam allowance. So our next step is to actually apply the pinked edge seam finish, which again only requires us to use a special pair of scissors. Now, most scissors would look like this. They are flat, straight, and sharp. There's no type of indentation on the blades. Pinking shears are different. Pinking shears are going to look like this. As you can see, there are some teeth, and again, they are zigzaggy, and they might remind you of the fun zigzag craft scissors that you had growing up. This is what we are going to use to simply trim the edges of our seam allowance, and that is how we do the pinked edge seam finish. So all we do is we're going to be trimming this edge. I like to always move my fabric out of the way, so I'm going to take this fabric, move it over and under, just like I do if I were sewing a seam finish. If I'm trimming it, I also want it to be out of the way. And we are simply just going to trim right on the edge. We don't want to take away a ton of the seam allowance, so we are just going to trim the edge like so. And as you can see, the edge now has this zigzag effect. We want to try to trim as straight as possible. And now that side is zigzagged. What the pinking shears does is it keeps the straight grain lines and the yarns from fraying out by creating a non-straight edge. So that's why it is a seam finish. It's not as professional. It might not hold up as well over time, but it's an easy seam finish to apply. Now we're gonna do the other side. So we're gonna move all the fabric over like this. We have our seam allowance. And again, we are just going to trim the edge like this, trying to keep as straight as possible. And there is our pinked edge. So now when we open it up, we don't have straight edges anymore, we have our pinked edges, and that is the easiest seam finish, simply using a different pair of scissors. And so this is what we call our pinked edge seam finish. So if you are looking for a quick and easy and beginner-friendly seam finish, grab yourself a pair of pinking shears and apply your pinked edge seam finish.